Karen King, Hollis Professor of Divinity at Harvard, has spent decades translating a text most Christians have never heard of. It is called the Gospel of Mary. The only complete copy sits in Berlin, preserved on Coptic papyrus dating to the 5th century. The original was likely composed in Greek 100 years after the death of Christ, and inside it, Mary Magdalene describes something the 4 canonical Gospels never record: a vision, a teaching about the soul, and an argument with Peter that ends with Levi defending her. To understand how a gospel like this survives at all, you have to start in Cairo in 1896. A German scholar named Karl Reinhardt was walking through the antiquities market that year when a local dealer offered him a codex. A codex is what scholars call an early bound book, the format in the first centuries of Christian era. This one was small, hand-stitched, written in Coptic, the language of Egyptian Christians. Reinhardt purchased it and brought it back to Germany. The codex he carried home was eventually catalogued as Papyrus Berlinensis 8502. Today it is more commonly known as the Berlin Codex. It contains 4 texts: the Apocryphon of John, the Sophia of Jesus Christ, the Act of Peter, and the Gospel of Mary. None of these appear in any Bible used by any Christian tradition today. The Berlin Codex sat in a museum in Germany for almost half a century before a proper scholarly edition was published. World wars, fires, and broken water pipes interfered with the work. By the time the first complete edition appeared in 1955, 2 smaller fragments of the Gospel of Mary had also surfaced. These were Greek fragments found at a site in Egypt called Oxyrhynchus. Scholars catalog them as P. Oxy, 3525, and P. Ryle, 463. They date to the 3rd century, which is older than the Coptic copy in Berlin. The presence of these Greek fragments tells us something important. The Gospel of Mary was not a single eccentric document. It circulated, it was copied, it traveled across the Mediterranean. According to Karen King, the original was composed in Greek in the early 2nd century, perhaps around the year 120. That places it within living memory of the apostolic generation. Whoever wrote it knew the Gospel of John and drew on its language. Whoever wrote it believed they were preserving teachings that mattered. So what does it actually say? The opening pages are missing. About 6 pages, gone, lost to the centuries. When the surviving text begins, the risen Christ is speaking with his disciples. He tells them that all natures, all formations, all creatures exist in and with one another. They will dissolve back into their roots. He warns them not to be led astray by anyone who claims to point the way to the Son of Man outside themselves. Then, he commissions to preach the gospel of the kingdom, and departs. The disciples are afraid, they weep. They ask each other how they can possibly go out among the Gentiles to preach, when the Gentiles did not even spare the Master himself. And here Mary stands up. She comforts them. She tells them his grace will be with them and will shelter them. She turns their hearts toward what he taught. Peter then does something that changes the rest of the text. He turns to Mary and asks her to speak. He says, "Sister, we know the Savior loved you more than the rest of the women. Tell us the words of the Savior which you remember, the things which you know that we do not because we have not heard them." What follows is the part that has kept scholars working on this gospel for more than a century. Mary recounts a vision. She saw the Lord. She asked him whether someone sees a vision through the soul or through the spirit. He answered that neither sees, but the mind, which is between the two, is what sees the vision. Then Mary describes what she calls the ascent of the soul. The soul rises through a series of confrontations. According to Karen King's translation, the soul meets 4 powers as it climbs. The first power is darkness, the second is desire, the third is ignorance, the fourth is wrath, and the 4th power takes 7 distinct forms. The first form is desire, the third ignorance, the 4th the excitement of death, the 5th the kingdom of the flesh, the 6th the foolish wisdom of flesh, the 7th what the text calls the wrathful wisdom. King refers to these 7 forms collectively as the wisdom of the wrathful person. Each power tries to stop the soul. Each interrogates it. Who do you think you are? The soul answers each one. To desire, the soul says, I did not see you descending, but now I see you ascending. Why do you lie when you belong to me? To the third power, ignorance, the soul says, do not judge what you do not know. To wrath, the soul answers that what binds it has been slain, and what surrounds it has been overcome. The soul rises free. This is the teaching Mary says she received privately from the Savior. It is not a teaching about temple sacrifices, not a teaching about law, not a teaching about the end of the world. It is a teaching about the inner journey of the soul out of the conditions that hold it in the world. When Mary finishes speaking, she falls silent, and the room goes very quiet. If you are following along and finding this useful, there are more stories like this on the channel about texts that did not make it into the Bible. Now to the part that everyone remembers. Andrew speaks first. He says he does not believe the Savior taught these things because they are strange to him. Peter goes further. He asks whether the Savior would have spoken these teachings to a woman privately, without telling the rest of them openly. He asks whether they should turn around and listen to her. The implication is sharp. He is questioning whether Mary is making it up. Mary weeps. She asks Peter whether he thinks she invented this in her own heart, or whether she is lying about the Savior. Levi answers. He turns to Peter and tells him that he has always been hot-tempered. He says Peter is now arguing against Mary as if she were an adversary, and then Levi has line that has launched 100 scholarly papers. If the Savior considered her worthy, who are you to reject her? Surely the Savior knew her very well. That is why he loved her more than us. The text ends shortly after that. The disciples go out to preach. The Gospel of Mary closes. Now stand back from the text and ask what the early church did with a document like this. The answer is that they did not include it in the canon. The four Gospels that became the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all show the risen Christ appearing to the disciples in various ways, but none of them grant Mary Magdalene a teaching role of the kind we see in this text. By the 4th and 5th centuries, when bishops were settling which books would be read in churches, Gospels that gave central authority to women, or that emphasized inner vision over apostolic succession, were left out. Karen King has been careful in how she describes this. She does not claim the Gospel of Mary preserves authentic words of the historical Jesus. She does not claim Mary Magdalene actually wrote it. She argues is that the text reflects a real debate inside early Christian communities, a debate about who has authority to teach, a debate about whether women can speak with the same weight as Peter, a debate about whether the gospel is primarily an outward proclamation or also an inward path of the soul. The text gives us a window into a Christianity that lost, or rather a Christianity that was edited out of the version that won. The communities that read the Gospel of Mary did not survive in any organized form. Their books were buried, hidden in jars in the Egyptian desert, or copied into private codices that ended up in museum vaults. We know they existed because their writings survived in places no one expected to look. Cairo antiquities markets, sand at Oxyrhynchus. A bound book carried home by a German scholar in 1896. What sits in Berlin today is not a complete picture of early Christianity. It is one voice from a much larger conversation, a conversation that the canon flattened into a single approved. Reading the Gospel of Mary does not change what Christianity became. It changes what we know about what Christianity could have been, and in those missing pages, in that argument between Peter and Levi, in Mary's In the Shoal of Things Past Wrath, in its 7 forms, there is a record of something the centuries tried to bury and could not quite finish burying. The text is short, about 8 pages of preserved Coptic, plus 2 fragmentary Greek pieces. Less than 1,000 words of dialogue survive, but for the better part of 2,000 years, those words were silent. Now they are not. For more stories like this on the channel, on texts the canon left behind, you know where to find them.